We all know healing takes time. Eleanor stood in that quiet lobby silent for 3 agonizing minutes. She told him her father, Walter Hayes, finally wanted to meet. Not as some maintenance guy, or the silent hero who saved her project without asking for credit, but as the man she trusted completely. He only stared back, his face stripped of any warmth. Without blinking, he quietly confessed he already knew Walter Hayes from his dark past. And meeting Walter Hayes had cost him absolutely everything he loved. He locked eyes with her, refusing to say another word. What would you and I do? Can love really survive when the woman he cherishes carries that deeply unforgivable name? Harrington Tower's lobby felt completely deserted, the late shift workers already gone for the night. Overhead, the massive chandeliers faded to a faint overnight glow. Eleanor's reflection remained frozen in the highly polished wooden floor. She hadn't taken a step since that heavy service door closed behind him. She never saw this coming, despite practicing a dozen different ways this chat might go. A polite refusal or perhaps a tiny spark of interest he tried to hide. Just the cautious dance of 2 adults finding love, finally ready to drop their masks. She wasn't ready for a man who looked her in the eyes and confessed his history with Walter Hayes. Had completely shattered his entire life. Yet his voice held absolutely zero anger. That missing rage was what she wrestled with while standing alone in that quiet lobby. No rehearsed complaints, no begging for sympathy. Just the heavy, undeniable truth of a trauma he chose to carry silently, finally dragged out into the open. Eleanor had absolutely no idea. That brutal reality sat heavily right in the center of her chest. The sickening realization that a dark history lay buried beneath everything she thought was true. A painful past that had shaped his every step. She stood there until she could finally move. Then she pushed through the glass doors, stepping out into the freezing night air. And his unspoken scars pressed hard against her ribs for the entire drive back home. When did their pasts collide? What did Walter Hayes actually do to him? Why did he choose to stay completely silent? What kind of future was she blindly pulling them into, totally unaware of his deep scars? His small Calder Street apartment was only 740 square feet, and he made that tight space work just like his own recovery. With absolute precision, refusing to let old ghosts or new problems dictate his daily life. His daughter Sophie started kindergarten the autumn after they first arrived. He packed her tiny backpack nightly, sitting at the table around 11, checking it twice to ensure her tomorrow was secure. His morning routine was built on a schedule so strict it felt like structural engineering. Awake at 5:45 to pack Sophie's lunch, always skipping the peanut butter. Always a solid protein that his little girl would happily eat. By 7:15, he walked her to Dunmore Avenue, watching her blend into the flow of kids with bright backpacks. He built this fresh start the same way he did everything else. Fully taking absolutely zero shortcuts. With the fierce focus of a single dad who knew how buildings stay upright. And you and I know this. The internal failures that destroy us are usually hidden. Late at night, with Sophie asleep, he sat doing structural calculations, building a new future out of broken pieces. The quiet, focused work protected his peace. My honest work kept my mind clear, making enough so buying Sophie's school clothes wasn't a stressful calculation. I never dated. It wasn't some strict rule, just a quiet reality I had naturally settled into over time. After losing my Megan and the agonizing aftermath. Rebuilding my heart to love again felt impossible while being the only anchor my little Sophie depended on. I locked that painful, vulnerable part of myself away in a dark room and never touched the door. Tucked deep inside my worn wallet, I kept a photograph snapped outside Mercy General on a crisp October Saturday morning exactly 10 years ago. Megan was laughing at something unseen. I was just looking right at her. Scribbled on the back, in my own handwriting, was a single faded date. I rarely pulled it out, yet I never once threw that piece of history away. Meanwhile, Eleanor, carrying the Hayes name I could never forgive, understood this since she was 12 years old, that carrying the title of Walter Hayes's daughter was never simple. We all know how family legacy works, beautiful from afar but rough on the skin. She had learned to shoulder that weight well. She accepted the directorship of Hayes Urban Group's massive new commercial development project. Branched 2 years ago, after her urban planning degree and 3 years at another firm. A deliberate choice her powerful father had accepted, though never completely endorsed. Walter always wanted her inside his company from day one. She needed to define her own future, untangled from the shadows of that unforgivable family name. She was never naive about romance. She was once engaged to someone Walter fiercely approved of, which honestly should have been her first warning. That engagement quickly shattered when she discovered an inappropriate text on his phone during a party. It wasn't a shocking message, just a quietly confirming one. She boxed up the ring without a single word and firmly stepped into her future. The Midtown Meridian project was 6 months into tense approvals when she discovered my mysterious note slipped under her heavy office door. It was exactly 11 lines long, written in my clear, very compact hand. I described the variance in load distribution and clearly identified the exact connection point. I cited the relevant building code section and formally concluded, I am flagging this in writing because verbal concerns in construction environments are frequently forgotten. Please route to your structural team at your earliest opportunity. My warning had no name attached. Believe it or not, she had to pry my identity from the building manager. She sent my note to her structural team, who immediately confirmed the glaring issue. Within 48 hours, she completely bypassed what would have been a massive, humiliating public catastrophe. She went down to personally thank me the following Tuesday. I simply replied with quiet warmth that I was glad it proved useful. But the detail that haunted her wasn't the fact that I miraculously rescued her project. It was how I did the right thing, then just walked away. No scheming, no leverage, no greedy follow-up. In the cutthroat corporate world Eleanor survived in, my choice to ignore power was so rare it felt like a foreign language. That quiet moment was the beginning of her paying close attention to me. 10 years ago, I lived a completely different life, changed by severe circumstances, yet never broken in my core character. I had been just 24 years old. Just 18 months into my role as a junior structural engineer at Hayes Urban Group. We both know the type. I was the guy asking highly inconvenient questions about cheap material substitutions. I was genuinely happy. Megan and I had been married for 7 beautiful months. He still remembers the evening Megan told him she was pregnant. He stood frozen in their kitchen for a full minute before touching the test. And then he just looked at her. She started laughing. Looking back, that was the last truly uncomplicated night he remembered. Here is where it started. The Grayfield contract was his firm's biggest project in 4 years. Somewhere in the late planning stages, a risky cost reduction decision had been finalized. They swapped the upper floor-bearing connectors for a lighter grade. Sure, it technically met the bare minimum safety threshold. But when he ran his own structural analysis, it created a margin of error he couldn't accept under the building's heavy load conditions. He flagged the issue in writing twice. The third time around, he took it up the chain. The tense meeting that followed included Walter Hayes. He presented his safety analysis. The hard numbers were not ambiguous. Walter listened, asked 2 brief questions, and then spoke. He spoke with the quiet patience of a man who had called shots for decades. The project schedule simply could not accommodate a review of decisions already finalized at the highest senior level. What they needed was for him to countersign that materials verification form that very afternoon. He told them he just couldn't sign it. The room went dead quiet, exactly the way rooms do when someone finally says the one unspeakable thing. The phone call came while he was still sitting at that table. It was Megan. Her voice was tight. He immediately recognized she was trying to keep herself steady. She was at St. Ambrose Hospital. They needed him there. The doctor found something on the prenatal scan and wanted to address it immediately. And his wife needed him. He asked to be excused. They told him the meeting wasn't over, that the materials form needed a signature, and that his presence was fully required. He calmly put his pen on the table, looked the project lead in the eye, and said, "My wife is in the hospital. I'm leaving right now." He was fired 4 days later for an alleged breach of professional conduct. 0 severance pay, no continuation of healthcare benefits past the end of the month. The pregnancy complication Megan was facing was entirely manageable under normal, stable conditions. But what they now faced, 0 income, absolutely no benefits. A wife desperately needing sustained prenatal monitoring. These were not normal conditions. They ended up losing the baby. Megan never truly recovered from the heartbreaking loss, the crushing financial pressure, or the heavy grief of both nightmares happening at once. She held on for 7 more agonizing months. He stayed by her side every day he could, working odd jobs every hour she was stable enough for him not to be there. She passed away in April on a Tuesday, with those jasmine candles sitting on the windowsill, simply because she had asked him to buy them for her. 2 years later, his cousin Daniel and his wife were killed in a terrible highway accident outside Portland. Their little daughter was only 2 years old. Her name was Sophie. No other family members were positioned to take her in. He filed the adoption paperwork himself and drove up to Portland alone to bring her home. He tucked her into the small bedroom he had freshly painted pale yellow. On her very first morning, he made her scrambled eggs and gently said, "Good morning. I'm your dad now. I know that's a lot. We'll figure it out." They accepted the past and they figured it out. Healing is slow. He watched his daughter sleep, unaware of the shadow looming over them. In those silent moments, he realized that this fragile piece was finally enough. His little girl was his anchor, the only reason he kept standing each day. Yet deep inside, the name Walter Hayes remained a toxic curse he could never forgive. It wasn't a loud, burning rage that consumed him. He was too exhausted for anger, but knew with cold, mechanical certainty that one heartless corporate decision made in that boardroom had crushed his family under the heavy weight of a ruthless corporate timeline. He kept running the painful math. The devastating equation always ended the same. Eleanor meeting little Sophie was a complete unexpected accident. She had stopped by the lobby one afternoon to hand over project blueprints and found him at the front desk with a little girl in a plaid uniform. The girl gave her that painfully honest stare only a 7-year-old has. Eleanor immediately knelt down to her eye level, greeting her with genuine, unforced warmth. Sophie quietly said hello back, then asked if she was the lady from the high office her dad spoke to so softly on the phone. He stepped in, whispering softly, "Sophie." She took the hint immediately and went back to her book. But she caught the split second of agony before he masked it again. And she deeply understood the weight of that pain. Let's reflect on this. We know how healing works. They both stepped carefully, silently building a new life together without ever giving it a name. She began visiting the site, constantly inventing excuses just to be near him. She soon learned that Sophie was in 2nd grade and had set her heart on becoming a marine biologist. He supported this dream completely, already visiting the museum with her twice. She even brought warm soup over to the building one afternoon when his sick daughter needed him to come home. She sat on the sofa with his daughter, reading a colorful book about deep-sea creatures, making funny voices for the anglerfish and giant squid, until the little girl fell asleep against her. Then, over dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant, Sophie finished her bowl of pasta and asked with the raw, filterless honesty of a little child, "Do you actually like my dad?" She looked at him with soft eyes. He stared down, paralyzed. "I think your dad is one of the most incredible men I've met," she replied. The child found this answer perfect and went back to eating. Walking home, her thoughts drifted back to her father. Walter Hayes had asked about him twice, storing the details away like cold corporate leverage. She saw this interest as a victory, a sign of hope for their future. Hoping that despite his cruel, ruthless nature, her father might respect their genuine bond. So, clinging to that fragile hope, she walked straight into the lobby the next evening, found her courage, and said her father wanted a meeting. Then he dropped the truth. Her father, Walter Hayes, was the man who ruined his life. She practically begged him to say it again, not because she had missed his painful words. "We both know the truth strikes deep." She needed to hear it twice to believe it. I repeated it. My tone wasn't angry or gentle, just an unmovable fact built on unchangeable history. "I know your father," I said. "I worked at his firm. I know exactly who he is, how he operates, and the tough calls he makes. I know what he sacrifices. Please understand, I am not bringing up this painful history to hurt you. I'm saying it because when you asked me about meeting him, I couldn't just stand there pretending those old scars didn't still ache." Eleanor finally asked the one question she dreaded hearing answered. "Why hide it?" "Because I stayed far away from you over that exact history." I sighed softly. "I kept away from you for that very reason. I tried keeping things strictly professional right from day one. She stood there, processing everything. I was admitting to her that I knew her identity all along and had kept that careful boundary not from indifference, but from an instinct that felt as, she realized, like an effort to shield myself, my daughter Sophie, and her. Choosing to protect instead of punish was what truly shattered her walls more than anything. I had rescued her business. I remained perfectly respectful, silently carrying the weight of my past grievance without ever weaponizing it against her. She went home and sat right at her kitchen table, spending 40 minutes on a call with her dad's old executive assistant, a woman named Ruth who worked at Hayes Urban Group for 15 years before she finally retired 3 years ago. Ruth vividly recalled the Grayfield project. She remembered that meeting. She definitely remembered me. Her voice held that guarded tone of someone who had replayed past mistakes for years, never quite making peace with the messy fallout they left behind. After hanging up, Eleanor unlocked the corporate HR archives, using her senior director access to dig into the past. An hour and 2 calls later, everything finally came to light and the past snapped into focus. She stayed at the kitchen island until 2 in the morning, buried under printed records and a cold tea she completely ignored. What she felt wasn't simple. It was a crushing mix of deep family loyalty crashing right into painful, undeniable guilt. She felt profound shame over her family's legacy in a way that felt different from personal guilt. It was messier, deeply rooted, and far harder to forgive. It terrified her how badly she still wanted me, despite the terrible timing of this truth. She felt a deep, heavy exhaustion that had absolutely nothing to do with missing sleep, yet beneath it all, a quiet, firm choice took root. She knew running solved nothing. She refused to look away. Next morning, she found her dad. Walter Hayes, at 62, looked exactly like the man he truly was. A corporate boss who made massive choices, owned the outcomes, and harbored far fewer regrets than anyone probably should. He was tall and sharp, pushing his reading glasses up his forehead to signal that he was fully ready to face whatever was coming. Those glasses rested on his forehead now. Eleanor dropped the papers onto his desk. She asked him point-blank if he remembered me. The structural engineer whose life was upended at his firm a decade ago. Walter stared at the past. It is easy to dismiss the past. The father of the woman he loved claimed he made too many decisions to remember him. The woman he loved described the project, the dispute, and that tense meeting. She detailed how he was forced to approve documents he had fiercely opposed. She described him racing to the hospital. She laid out the tragedy behind her own name, his firing, lost health care, and his wife's death. Her father sat in a heavy silence. Eventually, her father defended his choices, claiming the company faced a crisis and decisions were carefully reviewed. At every level, he insisted he could not recall the details she brought up, claiming that their harsh protocol was completely standard for that time. Standard, the woman he loved whispered. Her father argued that every firing caused unpredictable ripples and he simply made tough choices under pressure. That was just the harsh reality of corporate leadership. His wife died, she countered. Their baby did not survive. He lost his entire future and it all began when you decided a deadline mattered more than him being at the hospital with his family. Her father slowly took off his glasses and placed them quietly on the desk. She refused to back down. She admitted it was not the old decision itself that kept her awake at night. She knew her father never considered the future fallout, focusing only on the business problems right in front of him. What truly haunted her now was that his future was shattered by a choice her father made. Let's look closely at this. Her father simply moved on, never looking back. 10 years of record profits, grand openings, and corporate growth exactly as planned. While the business thrived, he was living as a broken man, working maintenance. Raising his little girl alone, clinging to a fading photo of his late wife. Yet his lingering grief never made it onto any corporate spreadsheet her father reviewed. Her father finally spoke. "You love this man." It was an undeniable fact. He said it with the cold, logical tone of someone discovering a technical truth instead of feeling the real pain. The woman he loved stayed silent, holding her ground through the tears. Her father truly looked at his daughter, the way parents often forget to. and he noticed a fierce resolve in her he had never quite seen before. This was not just the polished corporate mask she normally wore. It was something purer, an absolute readiness to forgive. She stood beyond the past, leaving her father far behind. And she refused to step back. Her father slowly put his glasses back on. He stayed silent. The woman he loved walked out, choosing her future over the past. Across town, little Sophie felt the shift, sensing a lighter atmosphere without understanding the heavy past around them. He had been unusually quiet for 3 solid days. He still cooked dinner, helped with her reading, and did all the caring things he normally did, but he carried a heavy stillness she recognized from those dark, painful moments when his memories of the tragedy were simply too heavy to talk about. She waited until Wednesday night, watching him sit on the couch sorting the mail. She climbed up beside him. "We both know healing starts now," and she spoke. "Is Eleanor not coming back?" Adrian quietly set down the mail. His daughter explained that I made their home feel alive again, like someone was finally there, waiting for them to arrive. It felt like a warm light was suddenly burning inside, pushing back the cold shadows of yesterday. She hadn't felt that secure since she was a very small child, she bravely admitted. She couldn't perfectly recall those early days, but her young heart knew my presence felt right. Adrian wrapped an arm around her, and she leaned into his steady warmth. He just sat there for a while with the envelopes on his lap, his daughter pressed against him, while he fought to keep his fractured heart from letting my family's past take over. That night, once Sophie was fast asleep, he called Marcus, his closest friend since college, a man who truly understood how to listen without passing judgment or performing. He laid it all out, everything about me and everything about Walter. He spoke our entire history aloud for the first time, not hiding a single painful detail. When the story ended, Marcus simply asked, "What are you afraid of?" Adrian sat with the heavy question, letting the ghosts of his history linger too long. "I'm terrified Sophie is holding on to a future that might not even have a place for her," he confessed. "I fear letting her love someone only for history to repeat itself, and she quietly swallows that trauma just to protect me from worrying. I dread being the reason she learns that harsh lesson so early." Marcus gently replied, "You know that old fear won't vanish if you just wait for better conditions." Adrian admitted he knew. "She already loves her," Marcus pointed out. "Sophie loves Eleanor, you heard it tonight." Adrian softly agreed that he certainly had. "Let's step into that kitchen with him." He sat there with a glass of water, surrounded by the heavy silence of the apartment and the sprawling city outside. He reflected on that old photograph kept in his wallet. He remembered the day it was snapped, a younger version of himself, entirely unaware of the heavy toll that real, vulnerable love would eventually demand. He had paid that painful toll in full with interest. For 10 long years he carried that crushing burden. Now we must ask ourselves, was letting past trauma dictate his future a price he was willing to pay forever? The shift began when Walter Hayes, whose name I bear, arrived at Harrington Tower. He didn't call ahead. He completely bypassed the gleaming main lobby doors. Instead, he entered through the concrete parking garage, asking the first worker he spotted where to find the maintenance office. Adrian was busy in the technical room behind the east stairwell, checking the heating and cooling schedule for spring, when the door opened. He glanced up, instantly recognizing Walter's face. It was the kind of recognition born from years of haunting memories, carrying absolutely zero surprise. Just a quiet settling, as if facing his past was an appointment he couldn't avoid. Walter lingered in the open doorway. He wore a tailored coat that cost more than Adrian's entire monthly rent. Yet for the very first time since their painful history began, Walter looked genuinely unsure of what he was about to say. "I needed to hear it from you," Walter stated directly. Adrian slowly placed his clipboard down. He offered the man no seat. He felt no need for false politeness or formalities. He simply nodded. "All right." He finally spoke his truth plainly, refusing to let old scars control our future any longer. You see, he spoke without rage. That old fire had hardened into heavy history long ago. He detailed that Grayfield meeting, the name he loved yet could never forgive, and Megan's call. The guard blocking the conference door, claiming their corporate meeting simply wasn't over yet. He remembered the sudden firing, the cut health benefits, and those dark following weeks. He stated only the facts. He never paused for dramatic flair. He delivered the past to Walter, like an engineer detailing permanent structural damage. Cold, factual, and completely free of opinion. Walter just stood there, listening in silence. His face shifted through phases, not real emotion but not a blank stare either. A strange middle ground. The weight I could never drop, Adrian confessed, wasn't the job. It wasn't the health benefits, the lost paycheck, or the financial ruin. It was that on the single day I desperately needed to leave. I was told a corporate project mattered more than my own family, and told by an executive who would never let his own life take second place. That brutal imbalance is what completely shattered my spirit. Not anger, just the unforgettable realization of my exact value to that corporation. Walter stared at the photo tacked to the board above Adrian's desk. A photo of Sophie at the beach, squinting at the sun and gripping a seashell. "Your daughter?" he asked quietly. "My daughter." Adrian confirmed, opening up to Walter about his little girl. Not begging for pity, but because moving forward meant focusing on her. Every choice he made today directly shaped his little girl's future. Sophie was part of his healing, and he'd spent years carefully making sure that she would never enter a place where anyone made her feel worthless. "Let's pause right here," Walter asked. "If I apologize, what does that change?" Adrian stared. "Saying sorry won't erase the date printed on my wife's death certificate," he replied. "It does not undo the deep pain Megan endured, or the grief Sophie faces when strangers ask about her mom and she measures her words. An apology is just the final card you play when you have nothing left." Walter stayed silent, staring down at the floor, then back at Adrian. "I am not asking you to forget the past," he said quietly. "I came to stand right here in your daily life, to truly understand the massive, painful distance I put between us. Not the safe, sterile version I pictured from my executive desk. Now I see it clearly. That a man stripped of his family over a timeline was wronged in a way I have absolutely zero right to excuse." He grabbed his jacket and walked out the exact same way he came in. The office was left entirely silent now. Adrian stood there, gazing at the picture of Sophie squinting against the bright sun, holding her seashell, and he thought about the unique burden of a wealthy executive stepping into a room with zero power, yet staying anyway. Eleanor, bearing the name he could never forgive, refused to wait. "You and I know we must choose our own future." Driving home, she promised she wouldn't wait for him to guide her through this messy healing. That wasn't her style, and honestly, a single dad like him needed a strong partner like her. So she took action. I watched as she finally faced her family's past. She ordered her legal team to audit those old Grayfield project terminations. She sat through every single meeting herself. She made it absolutely clear she was searching for cases where individuals had been fired under conditions falling far short of her company's ethical standards, especially those of us who lost crucial benefits during our most vulnerable personal moments. They found 4 heartbreaking cases. Ours was easily the most tragic. She took a formal reparation structure straight to the board. She avoided that word during her presentation because corporate language is strategic, but the truth remained. A retroactive financial support fund for those harmed former employees and our families. This came with a permanent institutional record acknowledging her company's past practices had completely failed to meet acceptable standards. The corporate board pushed back hard, but she held her ground. 3 tense sessions later, it finally passed. I knew she never believed this could actually erase the past, because you cannot retroactively fund a pregnancy that did not survive, or reverse the grief for my love who passed away in April surrounded by jasmine candles. You cannot return my 10 lost years. She never pretended that just writing financial checks and officially updating institutional records meant real justice, but she knew it was the crucial difference between a company that finally acknowledged its dark past and one that simply waited for its victims to quietly die off, move away, or just stop talking about the pain. Once everything was finished, she drove to Harrington Tower that Friday afternoon and asked the front desk for me. I came downstairs in my work clothes, looking understandably wary, guarded in that same defensive way I had always been with her, but standing there in the lobby, I finally looked directly into her eyes. She told me exactly what she accomplished. She never presented this as some magic fix that would change anything between us. She explained she only did it because it was massively overdue, because the past was wrong and she could not keep building her future on a toxic foundation filled with unacknowledged damage without letting that history define her own character. I quietly listened without speaking. "I am not asking you to feel differently about my father," she stated plainly. "I am not asking you to feel differently about any of it. I know I can't give you back what was taken. I know the true shape of what you lost." Then she voiced the honest thought she had been turning over for days. The one truth that remained when she stripped away every strategic and diplomatic excuse. That if the difficult day ever arrived where I decided I could never love her, she would still dedicate the rest of her entire career to ensuring my young daughter grew up in a world built far more honestly than the broken one that had been so unfairly built on my back. Something in my tired face changed. Not dramatically, certainly not like in the movies with swelling music and light hitting at just the perfect angle. It was far quieter than that. It was the profound change that happens when a wall realizes it no longer needs to be weight-bearing. Just a small internal shift, nearly invisible to anyone unless they had been watching me very carefully. I did not say a single word for a moment. Then I finally said, "I know you mean that." "I do," she replied. I looked at her for a long time. Then, for the absolute first time, she watched me choose not to look away. 3 whole weeks went by. I knew healing took time. The days felt unfinished, yet finally breathable. The gap between us still existed, but that harsh brick wall was gone. We navigated this new space carefully, honoring our shared history while respecting the fragile steps forward. As for my little Sophie, she knew Eleanor was a successful businesswoman I trusted, and they were still figuring out their bond. She understood that real friendship needs plenty of time to grow naturally. My daughter accepted this with the quiet wisdom of a child who knew grown-ups take way longer to figure things out than they actually should. Meanwhile, since his visit to Harrington Tower, Eleanor's father, Walter, had stayed much quieter than Eleanor had ever seen him. He stopped showing up just to flex his authority, only coming in when honest work was needed. He even had dinner with Eleanor twice. Both times he actually asked about her passions instead of obsessing over his company's financial return on those specific investments. A subtle shift, sure, but a deeply meaningful one. Quietly, without telling Eleanor a single word until it was finalized, Walter had also sold off his personal equity in a subsidiary, taking those profits to build something new. He created a healthcare fund for the families of construction and maintenance crews, keeping Hayes Urban Group's busy properties running. He proudly named it the Megan Brooks Foundation. Eleanor found out through the finance director, who was absolutely stunned by the sudden, generous act. She called her father immediately, and he calmly replied that it simply felt right. Then he mailed the complete packet of documents straight to me, including a brief cover letter that carried a heavy truth. He knew a simple apology could never erase the past, so he offered no empty words. He gave freely, asking for absolutely no forgiveness from me in return. On a breezy Saturday afternoon in late September, Eleanor brought Sophie to the East Side City Park, where the massive field stretched out. It was perfect for kite flying. The Southgate hot dog stand had stood there since before we were even born. Their bright yellow kite looked exactly like a fish. My daughter picked it out herself. It flew terribly, and Eleanor had to fix the tail twice by the car before it caught the breeze. An hour into their afternoon, I finally arrived. Fresh off a half-day shift, I wore my jacket, hands casually tucked in my pockets. I crossed the grass toward them with my usual steady, unhurried, yet purposeful pace. Like I finally knew exactly where my future was heading. Sophie saw me and bolted. I caught her, spun her around, and accepted the kite string she handed over like she was passing on top-secret duties. Eleanor stood a few yards back, just watching us. The late afternoon sun cast a beautiful low golden glow over us. I cracked up at a joke Sophie made. The rushing wind drowned out our happy voices completely. Minutes later, I strolled toward her while Sophie happily reclaimed full control of her flying fish. And in that moment, we stood together, looking forward. "She told me Walter sent a handwritten letter," I said. "A few days ago." "I heard that too," Eleanor said. "I read it." I paused, letting history settle. "He didn't ask for amnesia. He said he wanted to do something right if I would allow it. That's the word he used, allow. Eleanor held her silence. She let the quiet do its healing work. The foundation, I said. He put her name on it. I didn't need to explain. Eleanor understood exactly what that step forward truly meant. Megan Brooks, 10 years gone, now tied to a future that would keep existing. Not a sad monument to the past, a living legacy moving forward in the world. I just stood there for a long time. I heard Sophie shout across the grassy field and raised a hand to her. I don't know if I can ever completely forgive him, I finally said. I just want to be totally honest with you about that. I don't think true forgiveness is something I can force just to make the future easier. It has to arrive organically, only when the conditions for that release are truly real. I know, Eleanor whispered softly. But I refuse to spend the rest of my life staring backward at where I fell, I said. I've been trapped at that bitter edge for 10 years. I know every single stone there, and I paused, looking right at her. I think where I am right now is better than the past, and I choose to keep stepping toward a brighter tomorrow. I watched a knot loosen in Eleanor's chest, releasing a tension she had carried forever. I reached over and took her hand, a simple forward motion. I just wrapped my hand around hers in that wide field. With the yellow kite fighting the wind and my daughter's bright afternoon laughter, I simply held on. From across the open field, Sophie looked over and saw us. She immediately turned back to her kite, faking the intense nonchalance of a kid who had been secretly praying for this exact future. But she couldn't contain that joyful smile. It always did with my sweet Sophie. I can still see us standing in that golden light, a new family anchored in the wide field. The city rose gently around the park's edges, the kite tipping and recovering in the brisk autumn breeze. Across the path, lingering near those old oaks at the park's far northern edge, a tall man in a dark coat stood alone, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He refused to step any closer, never calling out. He just stood watching us, staring the way someone looks at a future they have zero right to claim, yet simply cannot bring themselves to stop witnessing. I finally spotted him. I studied Walter for a long, measured moment, scanning him like a damaged building's foundation, searching for the core, load-bearing truth of the man. Then I offered one small, deeply deliberate nod. Not absolution, not a welcoming invitation. Just an acknowledgement that he actually showed up and stood where he had zero power. He did the only thing left. It wasn't nothing. It meant that from this broken place, a future path might actually exist. Walter gave a slow nod back, then he turned, walking away into the trees. Sophie loudly announced for the third time that her kite needed an immediate emergency rescue. And I released Eleanor's hand just long enough to sprint across the grass to my daughter, laughing at whatever she was yelling about the complex physics of the whole situation. My joyful voice carried so easily across that field in the warm September air. But I know some apologies can never reach the places that matter most. You and I know I cannot rewrite the years between my moment of harm and the present. I cannot restore what was taken, undo my painful losses, or make the dead breathe again. That printed name on her foundation letterhead, the name I can't forgive, won't bring my loved one back. Her friendly nod across the park never erases my lost decade. My past stays painfully real, and refusing to forget is just a fact of life. Yet as a single father, I carried heavy grief so long I forgot what setting that crushing weight down even felt like. But look closely, you and I find honest moments, not magical fairy tales. Just imperfect forward steps where my heavy carrying finally ends. That painful weight stays right there in my memory, living inside a faded wallet photograph. In names whispered at charity meetings, yet her unforgivable name no longer dictates my entire road ahead. Take that quiet afternoon in the park. Between a yellow fish kite, my daughter's pure laughter, and the successful businesswoman whose hand I gently held without grand ceremony but with pure intention, I finally realized I was still standing. The solid ground remained, and the future, which I had avoided for years, suddenly demanded my attention, proving life had not quit on me. Returning to the moment, I reached out for Eleanor's hand. She warmly gave it to me. My Sophie happily ran ahead. The afternoon drifted on, just like days do when people actively decide, quietly without any fanfare, to stay.